The summer sun hung high in the clear blue sky, casting its warmth over the coastal highway as Marcus Thompson steered his sleek black SUV along the winding road toward Pine Harbor. His fingers rested casually on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine the only sound inside the car as the landscape shifted from the familiar bustle of city life to the quiet, relaxing expanse of the ocean. Tucked safely away in his wallet, his FBI badge was an afterthought. He was on vacation, away from the demands of his high-stakes job, and for the first time in months he could focus on his family and the simple pleasures of a much-needed break. In the passenger seat beside him, his wife Angela checked their rental confirmation on her phone, her brow furrowed slightly as she confirmed the details for the upcoming week. The kids, 14-year-old Zara and 10-year-old Marcus Jr., were seated in the back, their faces pressed against the windows as they gazed out at the scenic coastal views. Zara, trying her best to maintain her teenage composure, couldn't completely hide the excitement in her eyes as the car sped along the highway. Meanwhile, Marcus Jr. pressed his face against the glass, practically bouncing in his seat with enthusiasm. "Look at those waves, Dad," he shouted, his excitement bubbling over. The small, happy noise brought a smile to everyone's face. Even Zara rolled her eyes but couldn't suppress a small smile, knowing the beach would be an oasis for all of them after the hectic pace of their life in Washington, D.C. "Yeah, looks great," Marcus replied, his voice warm and relaxed, the weight of his work-related responsibilities feeling 1,000 miles away for the moment. They had been planning this trip for months, a full week in Pine Harbor, far away from the chaos of city life and his work at the FBI, where he specialized in white-collar crime investigations. Angela, a high school counselor, had chosen Pine Harbor for its idyllic, quiet beaches and small-town charm, a perfect place to unwind with their 2 kids. As the SUV passed through the town's main street, Marcus and Angela couldn't help but notice the quintessential beach town vibe: ice cream shops with brightly colored awnings, souvenir stores proudly displaying their beach toys and trinkets, and families strolling by in swimsuits and flip-flops. It was exactly like the photos they had seen online, and maybe even a bit more charming in person. The street was alive with vacationers, and the energy of the small town made it feel like the perfect escape. Angela, looking at the signs in the distance, suggested, "We should stop at the grocery store first. Just up ahead. We can stock up before heading to the rental house." Marcus nodded in agreement. He smoothly turned the steering wheel, guiding the SUV into the parking lot of Harbor Market, the town's largest supermarket. The family piled out of the car, stretching their legs after the long drive. Marcus Jr. immediately began bouncing on his toes in excitement, his NASA t-shirt barely staying tucked into his shorts as he grinned. Zara adjusted her purple headband, checking her reflection in the car window while her mother's sandals clicked on the pavement. They were dressed for the beach, Marcus in khaki shorts and a polo shirt, Angela in a flowy summer dress, and Zara and Marcus Jr. in casual, comfortable clothes. Inside the store, the family worked their way through the aisles with a sense of ease, a rare chance to simply be together without the pressures of daily life. Marcus Jr. begged for his favorite cereals, while Zara helped her mother select fresh fruit. "I've got the grill items for the beach barbecues," Marcus said as he picked out a variety of meats, his mind already on the upcoming nights of cooking and relaxing by the water. Angela, ever the organizer, tossed 3 bottles of sunscreen into their cart. "Don't forget the sunscreen," she reminded him, her tone light but firm. "The beach house has a private pathway to the shore, and I know these 2 will be in the water from sunrise to sunset." She ruffled Marcus Jr.'s hair affectionately as he bounced around in the cart. The cart filled quickly with the essentials: breakfast foods, sandwich ingredients, snacks, drinks, and all the little things they would need for a week of beach life. When they reached the checkout, the elderly cashier greeted them with a warm smile, making small talk as she scanned their groceries. "You folks visiting?" she asked kindly as she rang up the items. "Yes, we're here for a week," Angela replied, returning the smile. "First time in Pine Harbor. Well, you picked a wonderful time to visit. The water's perfect this time of year," the cashier said, her voice friendly as she continued scanning their items. Marcus handed over his credit card and then began to wheel the cart toward the exit, the family eager to unload the groceries and finally settle in for the week. The automatic doors slid open, letting in a warm ocean breeze that carried with it the unmistakable scent of salt water, mingling with the smell of the freshly baked bread from the bakery section. The parking lot had grown busier since they'd arrived, more vacationers now taking the opportunity to stock up for their stay. As they approached the SUV, Marcus clicked the key fob to open the trunk. The family, accustomed to this routine from years of grocery runs, worked in tandem. Zara and Marcus Jr. handed the bags to their parents, who arranged them neatly in the back of the SUV. "Can we go to the beach right after we unpack?" Marcus Jr. asked, his eyes wide with hope as he handed another bag to his father. Marcus smiled and placed the bag carefully in the trunk. "Let's get settled in first, buddy. We've got all week for the beach." Just as the trunk began to fill up, Angela noticed they'd forgotten the paper towels. "I'll run back in quickly," she said, turning toward the store entrance. "I won't be long." Marcus continued arranging the groceries with Zara and Marcus Jr., unaware that in just a few minutes, their peaceful family vacation was about to take an unexpected turn. What had been an ordinary afternoon was about to be interrupted by a series of events that none of them could have anticipated. As Angela walked back into the store, two police cruisers suddenly screeched into the parking lot. Their tires squealed against the asphalt as they stopped abruptly, positioning themselves to block the Thompsons' SUV from behind and the side. Four officers quickly emerged, their hands already resting on their holsters, eyes scanning the area with trained vigilance. "Hands where we can see them," the first officer shouted, his voice sharp, commanding. "Everyone step away from the vehicle." The family froze. Marcus felt his heart rate spike, but his training as an FBI agent kicked in. He raised his hands slowly, ensuring they were visible. His voice was calm, though he could feel the tension rising. "Kids, stay calm. Do exactly what I say," he said softly, his eyes locking with Zara's and Marcus Jr.'s. They stood motionless beside the cart, both staring wide-eyed at the officers. "Step away from the vehicle," the officer repeated louder now. Other shoppers had stopped to stare, some pulling out their phones to record. "Officers, my name is Marcus Thompson, these are my children, and we're just loading our groceries. We're here on vacation." Marcus's voice was steady, though his frustration was beginning to build. Another officer, Officer Brooks, approached with a cold expression. "We received a report of suspicious activity," he announced, his tone dismissive. "Witnesses say you've been casing vehicles in the parking lot." Marcus's chest tightened, and his voice grew more firm. "Sir, we're simply loading our groceries into our own vehicle. My wife just went inside for paper towels. You can check our receipt." "Oh, and I suppose that's your credit card too?" Officer Brooks replied, sarcasm dripping from his voice as he gestured to the bags in their cart. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." Inside the store, Angela had just finished paying for the paper towels when another shopper rushed in, breathless. Angela's heart was pounding in her chest as she rushed through the grocery store, her phone already in her hand, recording the scene unfolding outside. The moment her eyes landed on Marcus, his hands cuffed behind his back, standing motionless in the parking lot, panic surged through her. Zara and Marcus Jr. were standing frozen beside him, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. Her throat tightened with a sudden swell of anger and terror, and without thinking, she hurried toward the crowd. The oppressive summer heat seemed to radiate even more fiercely now, stoking her frustration. "What are you doing to my husband?" she demanded, her voice breaking through the chaos. As she moved toward the officers, two of them stepped forward quickly, positioning themselves between her and Marcus. "Ma'am, stay back," one of the officers warned, holding up his hand in a motion that stopped her in her tracks. Angela's mind raced. "That's my husband, and those are my children," she shot back, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "We're just shopping for our vacation. Do you have a reason for doing this?" Her question was loud enough for everyone to hear, and it only seemed to fuel the growing unease around them. As she stood her ground, trying to comprehend the madness of the situation, more people gathered, drawn by the unfolding scene. The elderly cashier, Mrs. Peters, who had checked them out just moments ago, hurried out of the store, trying to intervene. "Officers, please. I just checked them out not even 10 minutes ago," she called out, holding up the long receipt as evidence. "They're a lovely family, just buying groceries for their vacation. This is a mistake." Her words barely made an impact. Officer Brooks, one of the lead officers on the scene, turned his attention toward Marcus, whose wrists were still tightly bound by the cuffs. His face remained impassive, but his eyes betrayed the mounting frustration inside him. He knew all too well how such situations could escalate. Even though he had spent years working for the FBI, the sting of being falsely accused was a visceral experience. While Marcus kept his voice steady and tried to reason with the officers, a chilling sense of helplessness crept up on him. "I'm going to reach for my wallet very slowly," he said, his voice measured and calm despite the anger boiling beneath the surface. "In it, you'll find my FBI credentials." Officer Brooks scoffed, his tone dismissive. "Yeah, right," he mocked, a trace of amusement in his voice. "And I'm the President of the United States. Marcus, unfazed by the mockery, kept his voice level. He knew better than to escalate things further. "Call the local FBI field office," he said firmly. "They'll confirm my identity. I'm a federal agent, and you're making a serious mistake." The sound of Marcus Jr.'s sobs broke through the tense silence. "Dad, I'm scared," the boy whimpered, his voice small and fragile, a reflection of the terror he was feeling. His body shook with every breath, the helplessness in his eyes mirrored by the fear in his sister's. Zara, normally the quieter of the two, found her voice in that moment. "This isn't right, Mom," Zara said, her voice filled with emotion. "He didn't do anything wrong. We were just buying groceries." Angela's heart sank as she heard her daughter's words. "It's okay, sweetie," she reassured her children, her voice trembling as she struggled to hold herself together for them. "Everything's going to be okay." She squeezed Marcus Jr.'s hand tightly, trying to offer him comfort even as her own anxiety threatened to overwhelm her. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown, with several people pulling out their phones to record what was happening. The heat of the summer day pressed down heavily on the group, the scene becoming more tense and uncomfortable with every passing moment. Angela kept her phone steady as it continued to document the events unfolding in front of her. She knew that the world needed to see this, needed to know what was happening to her family. "This is racial profiling, plain and simple," Angela said, her voice rising in volume. Her words carried the weight of truth, and she made sure her phone captured everything. "You see a black family in a grocery store and you automatically assume we're criminals?" The growing crowd murmured in agreement. Many of them had begun recording too, the presence of phones making it clear that this situation wasn't just local, it was about to go viral. The elderly cashier, Mrs. Peters, waved the receipt in the air again, her hands shaking with emotion. "Please, officers, just check their receipt. They haven't done anything wrong." But Officer Brooks wasn't listening. His attention was entirely focused on Marcus. He began to search Marcus's pockets methodically, his skepticism clear on his face. When he pulled out Marcus's wallet, his expression remained doubtful, but as he opened it and saw the familiar FBI badge, his demeanor shifted, slightly. "That's it," Marcus said, his voice cold but authoritative. "Call it in. Call the field office right now. I'll wait." The tension in the parking lot was palpable. The voices of the onlookers grew louder, more insistent, as the crowd's collective anger began to rise. Marcus stood tall despite the handcuffs digging painfully into his wrists. His back was straight, his posture composed, though his heart was racing. He couldn't help but glance toward his children, his eyes filled with concern. The metallic press of the handcuffs was a physical reminder of how quickly everything had escalated, and how little control they had in the situation. As Officer Brooks spoke into his radio to verify Marcus's credentials, the rest of the officers maintained their aggressive stance, their hands still resting near their weapons. The air was thick with discomfort. Angela's phone continued recording, capturing every moment, every movement. She stayed close to her children, offering them what little comfort she could, her hands trembling not just with fear but with a growing sense of injustice. Zara, her face streaked with tears, spoke up again, her voice breaking. "Mom, this isn't fair. We didn't do anything wrong. They're treating Dad like a criminal." Marcus Jr. clung to his sister, his small frame trembling with sobs. His NASA t-shirt, once dry, was now wet with his tears. But it was the sight of the ice cream melting in their grocery cart, forgotten in the heat of the moment, that seemed to snap him out of his fear. "The ice cream's melting," he cried, his voice cracking with the heartbreak of the situation. "We were just buying food for our vacation." The heartbreaking statement drew the attention of several news vans, which had just arrived in the parking lot. Journalists with cameras and microphones quickly emerged, having received tips from bystanders who were already calling in to report what was happening. The local disturbance had escalated into something much larger, transforming into a full-blown media event. More police vehicles arrived, bringing the total to 6. Their flashing lights bathed the scene in red and blue, adding to the chaotic atmosphere. The crowd, now swelled to several dozen, spilled over onto the sidewalk. Many were still recording, their voices growing louder in their demands for justice. It was then that a sergeant arrived, his car marking the 7th police vehicle to pull into the parking lot. He stepped out, looking concerned at the growing crowd and the media presence. Walking briskly toward Officer Brooks, he spoke in hushed tones, his face betraying his understanding of the gravity of the situation. Marcus, despite being handcuffed and the pain in his wrists, addressed the sergeant directly. His voice carried the authority of a seasoned FBI agent. "I am a federal agent," he said, his voice calm yet filled with authority. "I'm being detained without cause while shopping with my family. Every second you keep me in these cuffs, you're violating my rights and you're making a serious mistake." The eyes of the crowd were on Marcus, on his family, and on the officers who had made the snap judgment to detain him. The tension in the parking lot was now thicker than ever, and the situation was about to explode far beyond the small, sleepy town of Pine Harbor. As the surgeon's radio crackled to life, the unmistakable voice came through loud enough for anyone within earshot to hear. "Credentials confirmed. Marcus Thompson is indeed a special agent with the FBI's Washington field office." The mood in the parking lot shifted dramatically in an instant. Officer Brooks, who had been so confident in his actions moments before, now looked pale as the realization of the mistake began to set in. The officer's aggressive stance dissolved almost immediately, replaced by an unmistakable nervousness. The sergeant, who had been standing by with his hands clasped in front of him, now stepped forward with the keys in his hand, ready to remove Marcus's handcuffs. But even as the cuffs were unlocked, the damage had already been done. Marcus rubbed his wrists, wincing slightly at the red marks left by the tight metal. He glanced at his family, his eyes filled with a mixture of frustration and disbelief. The vacation they had been planning for months, the time they had been looking forward to as a family, had been completely upended. In less than 30 minutes, everything had changed, and Marcus had a sinking feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger problem. The way his children had witnessed him being detained and humiliated, the way their lives had been upended in front of so many people, was something they would never forget. Angela continued to film everything, her phone capturing the raw injustice of the moment. She couldn't tear her eyes away from her husband's face as the handcuffs were removed, but the sight of the crowd, the witnesses, the reporters, the growing number of police cars, reminded her of just how public this moment had become. It wasn't just an isolated incident, it was something much larger, something that needed to be seen and understood. The once confident officers of Pine Harbor Police were now standing awkwardly in place, their expressions shifting from defiance to discomfort. The sergeant, whose nameplate read Reynolds, now stood with his hands clasped nervously in front of him. His face was a picture of concern as he addressed Marcus, his voice considerably softer than before. "Agent Thompson, sir," he began, his words coming out with a note of uncertainty, "we sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding." Angela couldn't hold her anger in any longer. "Misunderstanding?" she asked incredulously, her voice rising with the force of her emotions. "You call racial profiling a misunderstanding? You handcuffed my husband in front of our children because someone reported suspicious activity while we were loading groceries?" The words were sharp, cutting through the air with the weight of everything she had been holding back. As she stood there, phone still recording, her heart ached with the realization that this moment, the moment she had feared for years, was happening right in front of her, in broad daylight, for everyone to see. Marcus slowly moved toward his family, his wrists still red from the handcuffs, but the weight of the moment heavier than anything physical. As he approached his children, Marcus Jr. immediately ran to him, his small arms wrapping tightly around his father's waist. He sobbed into Marcus's shirt, his tiny body shaking with emotion. Zara, normally the more composed of the two children, joined them, trying her best to hold it together but unable to stop the tears streaming down her face. "It's okay now," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped his arms around both of his children. He held them close, trying to reassure them, but deep down he knew that nothing about this situation was okay. Nothing about this was right. The humiliation, the fear, the injustice, it wasn't something they could just brush off. Officer Brooks, who had been so aggressively in charge of the situation only moments before, now stood off to the side, his gaze averted. He avoided making eye contact with anyone, his discomfort palpable. The other officers, once so certain of their actions, began backing away, some of them returning to their patrol cars as if distancing themselves from the increasingly tense situation. It was clear that the atmosphere had changed and they wanted nothing to do with the fallout. A senior police official soon arrived on the scene in an unmarked car, his presence signaling the escalation of the situation. He introduced himself as Chief Wilson, and immediately moved to try to take control of the narrative. "Agent Thompson," he began, his tone much softer than before, "please accept our deepest apologies for the confusion. If you would like, we can escort you and your family out of here to ensure your safety." Marcus's voice, though calm, was firm and unwavering. "No, Chief Wilson," he replied, his words carefully chosen. "Everything about this incident needs to be public. Your officers profiled my family, threatened us with weapons and handcuffed me in front of my children, all because we were shopping while black. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Angela continued to film, capturing the nervous expressions of the officers who had treated her family so badly just moments before. The media presence had grown, with reporters now pressing forward, eager to capture every word, every piece of this unfolding story. A microphone was thrust into Marcus's face by one of the reporters, her question urgent and direct. "Agent Thompson," she said, "can you tell us what happened here today?" Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, recognizing the number of his FBI supervisor. The news had already reached the bureau, and they were calling to check in. "Excuse me," Marcus said to the growing crowd, his voice steady as he answered the call. He spoke quietly into the phone, his tone professional, but his mind was elsewhere, processing the situation and trying to maintain his composure. Angela kept filming not just for the world to see but for herself and for their children. She wanted to make sure that every moment was documented, every violation was captured, and the injustice of what had happened could never be swept under the rug. Nearby, Mrs. Peters, the elderly cashier who had tried to intervene earlier, came forward with bottles of water. She handed them to Marcus Jr. and Zara with a kind, apologetic smile. "I'm so sorry, dear," Mrs. Peters said softly. "I tried to tell them you were just shopping. I saw everything." Zara accepted the water, but her hands were still shaking too much to drink. Marcus Jr. had stopped crying, but he refused to let go of his father's shirt. Even as Marcus tried to focus on the phone call, his son clung to him as if the only thing that could make the world feel safe again was the familiar presence of his father. As Marcus finished the call, Chief Wilson attempted to approach Angela. But she held up her hand to stop him, her voice firm and unyielding. "My husband is an FBI agent with 15 years of experience," she said, her words sharp and filled with the weight of everything they had just experienced. "He has helped catch dangerous criminals and protected this country. Yet your officers saw nothing but the color of his skin. Our children watched their father being handcuffed like a criminal. Do you understand what that does to a child?" Chief Wilson's face reddened with embarrassment, and he stood silently, his hands at his sides, clearly realizing the gravity of what had transpired. More senior police officials arrived, along with someone from the mayor's office, as the scene took on the air of an impromptu press conference. Marcus turned to face the cameras, his FBI training kicking in as he spoke clearly and professionally. "Today my family experienced firsthand why we need police reform in this country," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "I am a federal law enforcement officer, but before those credentials were confirmed, I was just another black man being criminalized for everyday activities." The reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads, and the camera operators adjusted their equipment, trying to capture every word. Chief Wilson stood nearby, increasingly uncomfortable as Marcus continued, "What happened here today wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a perfect example of systemic racism in law enforcement. And as both a federal agent and a black father, I cannot and will not let this incident be swept under the rug." Angela moved closer to her husband, still recording. The grocery cart stood forgotten nearby, the ice cream now completely melted, a small but poignant symbol of how quickly their family's vacation had transformed into something much bigger than they could have ever anticipated. 3 hours later, the Thompson family sat in the living room of their beachfront rental house. The view of the ocean outside was now just a distant thought, lost in the weight of the events they had just endured. The groceries had been delivered by apologetic store employees, but no one had any appetite. Marcus sat on the couch, his phone buzzing constantly with calls from FBI headquarters, civil rights attorneys, and news organizations. He had already spoken twice with his supervisor and once with the FBI director. Angela sat nearby, uploading the video she had recorded to multiple social media platforms, ensuring that their story was preserved for the world to see. Zara, sitting quietly by the window, spoke up. "Dad," she asked, her voice filled with uncertainty, "are those police officers going to get in trouble?" She had changed out of her vacation clothes into something more comfortable, but the emotional toll of the day was clear on her face. She had witnessed firsthand the injustice her family had faced, and now the question that lingered in her mind was one that still haunted Angela's heart. What would come next? The evening was still young, only 6 p.m., yet the Thompson family had already experienced more than enough for one day. Angela sat on the couch, still in her pajamas, the weight of the day settling into her bones. She glanced over at her teenage daughter, Zara, who was seated near the window, staring out at the ocean with an expression that seemed both distant and heavy, as though the events had aged her in ways no child should ever be made to feel. Marcus, seated beside her, could see the toll the day had taken on his children, particularly Zara, whose youthful energy had been replaced by a weariness that mirrored his own. "Yes, honey," Marcus replied quietly, his voice firm but filled with the weight of the situation. "There will be consequences. The FBI's Civil Rights Division is already involved." Marcus Jr., who hadn't left his father's side since they arrived at the rental house, looked up from where he sat on the floor, his eyes swollen from the tears he had shed. "I don't want to go to the beach anymore," he said, his voice small and uncertain. "What if those police officers come back?" Angela put down her phone, immediately moving to comfort her son, her heart aching for him. She knelt beside him, running her hand through his hair. "Baby, those officers won't come near us again," she reassured him, trying to soothe his fear. "In fact, the police chief himself promised to have special security watching our house to make sure we're safe." Zara's voice, laced with bitterness, interrupted the moment. "That's supposed to make us feel better?" she asked, her eyes narrowed as she looked toward her parents. "More police watching us?" Before anyone could respond, the sound of the doorbell rang through the house, making everyone jump. Marcus stood up cautiously, his instincts still alert as he moved toward the door. He peered through the peephole, recognizing the figures standing on the other side. Mayor Richardson of Pine Harbor was there, along with 2 members of the city council. "The mayor's here," Marcus announced to his family, his tone even, though he could feel the simmering anger just beneath the surface. "Should we let them in?" Angela straightened her clothes and nodded, determination in her eyes. "Let them see what their police did to our family," she said, her voice tinged with resolve. "Let them see how their children are traumatized." With a deep breath, Marcus opened the door, maintaining his professional composure despite the rage that simmered inside. Mayor Richardson, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, stepped in, her expression one of genuine concern, but Marcus could tell she was struggling to maintain her composed demeanor. "Agent Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," the mayor began, her voice sincere but measured. "I cannot express how deeply sorry we are for what happened today. Our city prides itself on being welcoming to all visitors, and what occurred today was inexcusable." Before anyone could respond, Marcus Jr. burst into fresh tears, his sobs heartbreaking. "They put handcuffs on my daddy," he cried, his voice cracking. "We were just buying food." The mayor's professional facade cracked as she watched the young boy sob, her eyes filled with remorse. One of the council members, a black woman named Dr. Harris, moved to sit near the children, offering a comforting presence. "Sometimes bad things happen that show us what needs to be fixed," Dr. Harris said gently, her voice soothing. "Your daddy being brave today is going to help make sure this doesn't happen to other families." Angela's phone buzzed in her hand, and she glanced at the screen to see multiple notifications. Her video, the one she had recorded during the incident, had already gone viral. It was being shared widely, with hundreds of thousands of views flooding in. The national news networks were picking up the story. Marcus stood firm, his face serious as he addressed the mayor. "Mayor Richardson," he said, his voice unyielding. "My family came here for a peaceful beach vacation. Instead, my children watched their father being handcuffed for buying groceries. No apology can undo that trauma." The mayor nodded solemnly, her eyes filled with understanding, but she knew there was much more to be done. "We understand," she said, her voice calm. "We are prepared to take immediate action. Officer Brooks and 2 others have already been placed on administrative leave. We're launching a full investigation, and we welcome FBI oversight." Zara, who had been silent until now, suddenly stood up. "I want to go home," she said, her voice filled with resignation. "I don't want to stay here anymore." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of a shattered dream. The vacation they had planned for months, their chance to relax and bond as a family, had been irrevocably tainted in less than an hour at a grocery store parking lot. Marcus's response, however, surprised everyone in the room. "No," he said firmly. "We're not going to let them drive us away. We paid for this house and we have every right to be here. We're going to stay." Angela reached for his hand, squeezing it supportively. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "Our children need to see that we don't run from injustice." Marcus's gaze shifted to Zara and Marcus Jr., his heart aching as he looked at the 2 young faces, forever changed by the events of the day. "We stand our ground," he said firmly. "We fight for what's right. We make sure changes happen." The mayor and council members exchanged glances, fully realizing the gravity of the situation. This incident was no longer just a local issue. It would forever transform their small beach town. The news was out and there was no turning back. Outside, the sun was beginning to set over the ocean, its peaceful beauty a stark contrast to the turmoil unfolding in the Thompson family's living room. What should have been the first day of their vacation was now marked by a profound sense of injustice. By morning, the story of the Thompson family had exploded across the nation. Angela's video had garnered over 2 million views overnight, and news vans now lined the quiet beach street outside their rental house. The hashtag #ShoppingWhileBlack was trending nationwide as people shared their own stories of racial profiling and discrimination. Inside the house, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, his eyes tired as he watched his children pick at their breakfast. Neither Zara nor Marcus Jr. had slept well, plagued by nightmares of the previous day's events. Angela was upstairs speaking with producers from Good Morning America, who had reached out to feature their story. "Your phone is ringing again, Dad," Zara pointed out, her voice soft as she pushed her untouched cereal around the bowl. Marcus checked the caller ID. It was Ben Robertson, his old friend from the FBI Academy, now working in the Civil Rights Division. He answered, putting the call on speaker so his family could hear. "Marcus, we're taking this seriously," Ben's voice filled the kitchen. "We've opened a formal investigation into the Pine Harbor Police Department. This isn't just about yesterday. We're looking into their past complaints, their training procedures, everything." Marcus Jr. perked up slightly, his voice tentative. "Are the mean police officers going to jail?" Ben's voice softened, trying to reassure the boy. "Hey little man, we're going to make sure what happened to your dad never happens to another family, okay?" Angela came downstairs, still on her phone. "The governor just released a statement," she announced. "She's ordering a state-level investigation into racial profiling by police departments across the state." Outside, they could hear the sounds of protesters gathering. Local civil rights groups had organized a peaceful demonstration in front of the Pine Harbor Police Station, just a few blocks away. Signs reading "Justice for the Thompsons" and "Black Families Matter" were visible from the window. Before Marcus could respond, his phone rang again. It was his supervisor from the FBI. "Thompson," the supervisor said. "I know this isn't how you plan to spend your vacation, but we need you to do a press conference. Your unique position, as both a victim of racial profiling and an FBI agent, makes your voice particularly powerful." Just as Marcus was about to reply, someone knocked at the door again. Looking through the peephole, he saw Reverend James Marshall, a prominent civil rights leader who had flown in overnight from Atlanta. When they opened the door, Reverend Marshall greeted them warmly. "Agent Thompson," he said, his voice filled with resolve, "your family's experience has become a catalyst for change. People are listening. We need to make this moment count," Marcus said, his voice steady and resolute. His family, who had been quiet and reflective all morning, listened intently. Zara, who had been staring out at the ocean, turned her attention back to her father. She'd been deep in thought, but now, a flicker of recognition crossed her face. She raised her hands slightly, almost as if she needed to ask permission before speaking up. "Dad," she said, her voice soft but determined. "Remember when you taught me about Rosa Parks? How one person standing up against injustice can change things?" Marcus looked at his daughter, a sense of pride swelling within him. In that moment, the fear and uncertainty that had clouded her eyes seemed to dissipate. Understanding had begun to replace the fear that had overtaken her the night before. "That's right, baby," Marcus replied, his voice filled with warmth and a new sense of hope. "Sometimes, change starts with just one incident, one person standing up and making everyone else see the truth." Angela, who had been scrolling through her phone, looked up from her screen. Her brow furrowed as she read the latest message that had just arrived. It was from Mrs. Peters, the kind cashier from the grocery store where the incident had occurred. The message informed them that local community members had organized a support rally at the beach that afternoon. Over 500 people had already confirmed they would attend, and the number was rising by the minute. "Marcus," Angela said softly, showing him her phone screen. "Look at these comments on the video. So many people are sharing similar stories. This is bigger than us now." Marcus took a deep breath, his mind racing with everything that had happened over the past 24 hours. He could feel the gravity of the moment, and it was clear that this incident had already become more than just a personal experience for their family. It was the beginning of something far larger, a movement for justice that was taking root in the hearts and minds of people all over the country. He gathered his family in the living room, the weight of the decision ahead of them settling in the air. "I need to ask you all something important," Marcus began, his voice filled with quiet resolve. "We can go home today. Let the FBI and the lawyers handle everything and we can try to move on. Or we can stay. We can speak up and try to make real change happen. This is a family decision." Marcus Jr., who had been clutching his NASA shirt, the same one he had worn the previous day, looked up at his father. Will it help other kids not see their dads get handcuffed? He asked, his voice filled with both confusion and hope. Marcus knelt down beside him, placing his hands on his son's shoulders. Yes, son, he said, his voice firm and reassuring. That's exactly what it might do. The boy's eyes brightened with a newfound sense of purpose. Then we should stay, Marcus Jr. said with a firm nod, his small voice filled with bravery beyond his years. Zara, who had been quiet until then, stood up, her expression resolute. We can't let them win by making us leave, she said, her voice filled with determination. Angela reached for Marcus's hand, squeezing it gently as she looked into his eyes. Whatever we do it together, she said, her voice soft but filled with strength. Marcus took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before him. This was no longer just about his family, it was about something much bigger, something that could potentially make a difference for many others who had suffered in silence for far too long. He called his supervisor back, his voice steady as he made the request. Set up the press conference, Marcus said, his words clear and unwavering. But I want to do it right here in Pine Harbor, and I want my whole family beside me. America needs to see exactly who these officers terrorized yesterday. A family on vacation, a federal agent, 2 innocent kids, all judged simply by the color of their skin. As he spoke, more protesters began to gather outside their rental house, their chants of justice for the Thompsons carrying across the quiet beach town. News helicopters circled overhead, and social media continued to explode with support for the family. The rallying cry for justice was gaining momentum, and the Thompson family was at the heart of it. 1 week had passed since the incident at Harbor Market, and Pine Harbor had become the epicenter of a national conversation about racial profiling. The town, which had once been a peaceful coastal retreat, was now facing unprecedented scrutiny. The Thompson family, still in their beach rental, found themselves at the center of major changes sweeping through the town. Marcus sat at Pine Harbor City Hall, wearing his FBI suit instead of the vacation clothes he had planned to wear when they arrived. Before him sat the entire city council, police leadership, and a team of federal investigators. The room was packed with media representatives, their cameras clicking constantly as they prepared to capture every word. Let me be very clear, Marcus said into the microphone, his voice steady and strong. In the past week, we've uncovered 67 similar complaints against the Pine Harbor Police Department. 67 families who were harassed, detained, or threatened while doing ordinary things. His voice carried across the room and a murmur rippled through the audience. Angela sat in the front row, holding hands with both of their children. Marcus Jr. had stopped having nightmares about the incident, but now he drew pictures of police cars with big X's through them, a symbol of defiance against the injustice they had experienced. Zara had started a blog about their experience, which had already gained thousands of followers. Her voice, too, had found its place in the conversation. Chief Wilson, looking much older and more worn than he had just a week ago, stood to address the room. Based on our internal investigation and the FBI's findings, he said, his voice thick with regret, I am announcing my resignation, effective immediately. Additionally, Officers Brooks, Stevens, and Martinez have been terminated from their positions. A murmur ran through the crowd and cell phones rose to record the historic moment. But Angela was not satisfied. She stood up, her voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. That's not enough, she called out, her voice filled with urgency. Your entire department needs retraining. Your policies need to change. Your hiring practices need to be examined. Dr. Harris, the Black City Council member who had visited them the night of the incident, stepped forward, holding a thick document in her hands. We're implementing the Pine Harbor Police Reform Act, she announced to the room. New training requirements, body cameras for all officers, community oversight boards, and mandatory bias training. Agent Thompson and his family have helped us design these changes in the week since the incident. The Thompson children, who had once been terrified by the events, had now found their voices. Zara had spoken at her first rally 2 days ago, telling hundreds of people how it felt to watch her father being handcuffed. Marcus Jr. had appeared on a children's news program, explaining to other kids why what happened was wrong, and why they needed to speak up when they saw injustice. The changes we're announcing today, Marcus continued, his voice rising with emotion, include a new civilian review board. This board will have real power to investigate complaints and recommend discipline. And yes, I've agreed to serve as a special advisor to this board. Officer Brooks and the other fired officers sat at the back of the room, required to attend as part of their termination proceedings. They looked uncomfortably at the floor as Marcus detailed their history of complaints, their failures, and their disregard for the communities they were supposed to serve. We've also discovered, Marcus added, that Pine Harbor PD has been targeting tourists of color for years. Many families never reported it because they were just passing through. But that stops today. Angela's viral video, which had been shared by millions, had now reached over 20 million views. Major civil rights organizations had taken up their cause, sending lawyers and advocates to help reform the department. Mrs. Peters, the elderly cashier who had tried to intervene, had become a local hero. She sat proudly in the audience, her face filled with pride. "My family came here for a vacation," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion, "and instead we found a mission. My children learned a harsh lesson about racism in America, but they're also learning about the power of speaking up and demanding change." The doors at the back of the hall opened and more people streamed in. Former victims of police profiling in Pine Harbor had returned to tell their stories. Some had traveled from across the country after seeing the Thompson family's story on the news. Marcus Jr. tugged on his mother's sleeve. "Mom," he whispered, pointing to his father, "Dad's not just an FBI agent anymore. He's like a superhero. He's fixing things." Angela smiled through her tears. "He always was, baby. But now everyone else can see it too." As Marcus concluded his presentation, he unveiled the next steps in their fight for justice. The changes were just beginning. The Pine Harbor Police Department had announced a major reform initiative, a change that would reverberate throughout the community for years to come. The department would now require all officer candidates to spend time living with and learning from families of different racial backgrounds before being hired. This initiative was designed not just to provide training but to foster empathy, to encourage understanding, and to break down the barriers of fear and misunderstanding that had led to the tragic events of the past week. "Real change," Marcus said, looking directly at the cameras, "comes when we stop seeing each other as threats and start seeing each other as humans. My family's vacation was ruined, but maybe, just maybe, we can help create a world where other families won't have to go through what we did." His words hung in the air, a promise of something larger, something that would ripple across the country and hopefully help reshape the future. The room erupted in applause, a wave of support and recognition for the Thompson family's courage. Outside, the supporters cheered. In the back, Officer Brooks, the officer who had been the face of their trauma, finally looked up, meeting Marcus's gaze for the first time since the incident in the parking lot. For the first time he saw not a suspicious person, but a man who had turned his experience with injustice into a powerful force for change, inspiring not only his own community but a nation. 6 months after the incident at Harbor Market, the Thompson family returned to Pine Harbor, but this time they weren't alone. News crews, civil rights leaders, and hundreds of supporters had gathered to witness the changes their ordeal had sparked. It was a moment of reckoning not just for the town but for the country at large. Marcus stood at a podium outside the newly renamed Community Safety Center, which had replaced the old police station. The autumn breeze ruffled his suit jacket as he addressed the crowd, the sound of the waves in the distance serving as a gentle reminder of the peacefulness they had once come to Pine Harbor to find. "My family came here for a beach vacation," Marcus began, his voice steady and strong, carrying across the attentive crowd. "Today we return to see how one moment of injustice has transformed into lasting change." Behind him stood a diverse group of new police recruits, all graduates of the reform training program that Marcus had helped design. These recruits had undergone the new curriculum, one that prioritized empathy, racial awareness, and de-escalation techniques. The program wasn't just about giving officers the tools to do their job, it was about equipping them with the tools to build trust and understanding with the communities they served. Angela sat in the front row with Zara and Marcus Jr., both children proudly wearing t-shirts that read "Changemakers." Marcus Jr. no longer flinched when he saw police cars, thanks partly to the healing sessions he had attended with other children who had witnessed similar incidents. Zara had become a youth activist, speaking at schools about standing up against racism. In the past 6 months, she had used her voice to reach hundreds, if not thousands, of young people, inspiring them to speak out and take action against injustice. Pine Harbor has become a model for police reform, Marcus continued, his voice rising with passion. 28 other cities have adopted our new training programs. Over 50 police departments have requested our community engagement guidelines. The statistics appeared on a large screen behind him, each one a testament to the transformation Pine Harbor had undergone in just a few short months. 100% of Pine Harbor police officers now wear body cameras, Marcus said, pointing to the screen. Complaints of racial profiling have dropped to 0. The new Civilian Oversight Board has reviewed 89 past cases. 6 former officers have been prosecuted for past misconduct. He paused, letting the weight of those numbers sink in. The department had also hired 15 new officers from diverse backgrounds, officers who reflected the community they were sworn to protect and serve. Mrs. Peters, the cashier who had tried to intervene that day in the market, now served as chair of the Civilian Oversight Board. She stood proudly with other board members, wearing her official badge, a symbol of the change she had fought for alongside the Thompsons. But numbers don't tell the whole story, Marcus said, gesturing to his family. Real change is measured in human terms. He turned to look at Marcus Jr., who had once been terrified of police officers. My son Marcus Jr., who once had nightmares about police, just last week gave a tour of the school to our new community officers. Marcus Jr. waved shyly as the crowd applauded. He wore a new NASA shirt, but this time it was paired with a Junior Police Academy badge, part of the new youth outreach program designed to bridge the gap between law enforcement and young people. It was a symbol of a future where children no longer feared the very people who were meant to protect them. Zara stepped up to the podium next. Her voice was strong and clear as she read from a speech she had written herself. What happened to our family was terrible, she began, her words measured and direct. But we turned that terrible moment into something powerful. My blog now has readers in 50 countries, all sharing stories and working for change. Angela, sitting in the front row, wiped tears from her eyes as she watched her daughter speak. Zara's blog had become a beacon of hope and resistance, helping others who had experienced similar trauma. It had grown into a powerful platform for advocating justice, shining a light on the stories of people who had been overlooked for too long. Angela's viral video had become a teaching tool in police training programs nationwide, helping to reshape how police departments approached issues of racial profiling. Angela had recently accepted a position as a consultant for police community relations, turning her family's trauma into a force for education. Officer Brooks's replacement, a young black woman named Officer Carter, stepped forward to speak. The Thompson family showed us what needed to change, she said, her voice firm but empathetic. Now we work every day to earn our community's trust, not demand it through force. The ceremony continued with the unveiling of a new monument, a simple plaque that read, "Asterisk on this spot, one family's courage sparked a revolution in community safety. May we never forget the lesson. Justice requires vigilance, understanding, and change." Asterisk. As the plaque was unveiled, Marcus Jr. tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "can we go to the beach after this? I'm not scared anymore." Marcus smiled, remembering the fear that had once overtaken his son during their ruined vacation 6 months ago. "Yes, son," he said, his voice filled with love and pride. "And this time we'll make nothing but happy memories." As the ceremony ended, people gathered around the Thompsons, sharing stories of how their case had inspired changes in their own communities. A group of children presented Marcus Jr. with a handmade cape, calling him a junior justice warrior. It was a moment of joy, a symbol of the incredible transformation that had taken place, not just in Pine Harbor but across the country. Later that afternoon, the Thompson family finally got their beach day. As they walked along the shore, they passed several police officers on community patrol. The officers smiled and waved, recognizing the Thompsons and understanding exactly who they were and what they had accomplished. "Look," Sarah pointed out, "no one's staring at us suspiciously," Angela said softly. "No one's calling the police. We're just a family enjoying the beach." Angela squeezed Marcus's hand as they watched their children play in the waves. "We didn't just change Pine Harbor," she said softly. "We changed ourselves too. We're stronger now." Marcus nodded, watching a police car drive peacefully past their beach spot. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "the worst moments in our lives become the catalysts for the best changes. We came here as victims 6 months ago. We return now as champions of change." As the sun set over Pine Harbor Beach, the Thompson family finally got their vacation, not the one they had originally planned, but one that had helped change the nation's conversation about justice, dignity, and the power of standing up for what's right.